Longer waiting for the special counsel's report. Democrats are launching a sweeping new probe into President Trump, his business dealings, and his family members. Democrat leaders admit before you begin impeachment, you've got to convince the American public. So is that what the new investigations are all about? Plus, brand new pictures from the southern border as a new report reveals an unprecedented number of migrant families crossing into the U.S. illegally this month alone. The news comes just days ahead of a vote in the Senate, where a growing number of Republicans say they will help Democrats block the president's national emergency aimed at funding the border wall. We've got the late-breaking news from Capitol Hill. Also breaking late tonight, an ethics watchdog filing a complaint with the Federal Election Commission. Could Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her chief of staff be in big trouble? The complaint claims more than $1 million in political donations wound up in that staffer's own companies. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We begin tonight with House Democrats and their aggressive new probes into President Trump, his businesses and family members. Democrats say it's their duty, but how will the American people react? Correspondent Trace Gallagher has the details and the fallout. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. The chair of the House Judiciary Committee, New York Democratic Congressman Gerald Nadler, has certainly thrown down the gauntlet, saying it's crystal clear that President Trump has obstructed justice, among other crimes. Yet Nadler is also acknowledging that Democrats, quote, don't have the facts yet. So the Judiciary Committee has now requested documents from 81 Trump associates, including those related to the removal of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, the firing of James Comey, as well as documents from former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, and former Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. Here's Nadler on CNN. Watch.
We have to lay out a case to the American people and reveal it, because we have not seen an administration in a long time prior to this in which there were so many attacks on the rule of law.
And today, President Trump was asked if he'd cooperate. Listen.
I cooperate all the time with everybody. And you know the beautiful thing? No collusion. It's all a hoax. You're going to learn about that as you grow older.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy was a bit more combative, saying this move by Gerald Nadler is nothing more than the Democrats' Plan B.
Nadler is setting the framework now that the Democrats are not to believe the Mueller report. They're now saying we have to do our own investigation.
Actually, that would be investigations, plural, into everything from the Trump Tower meeting involving Trump campaign officials and a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin, to the Trump organization's plans to build a Trump property in Moscow.
We'll need to talk to some of the banks that have been doing business with Mr. Trump, like Deutsche Bank, which has had a history of laundering Russian money. But we also will want to speak with the accountants, the chief financial officers for the Trump organization, and others who would have information about the Moscow Trump Tower deal.
Democratic leaders have already expressed concerns about moving too fast on impeachment, so it appears the new path is a methodical attack on the president's finances and a litany of other allegations. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Aware of the Democrats' repeated promises to flood the White House with subpoenas and document requests, the president had this to say about these investigations over the weekend.
So now they go and morph into, let's inspect every deal he's ever done. We're going to go into his finances. We're going to check his deals. We're going to check. These people are sick.
Okay, let's bring in National Security Attorney Bradley Moss, columnist at The Hill, Kristen Tate, and Fox News contributor, former GOP congressman and author of The Deep State, Jason Chaffetz. Great to have all of you with us.
Good evening, Shannon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
And we just now have a tweet in from Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who's chair of the House Finance Committee. She says this: obstruction of justice reality show, firing Comey, sending coded messages to Manafort and others that he has the power to pardon, lying about Trump Tower meeting, threatening Cohen's in-laws, attempting to destroy Mueller. What more do we need to know? Impeachment is the only answer. Jason?
Well, she started saying impeachment pretty much when the president was elected. Mueller is still in place. The Democrats joined the Republicans. In fact, they were even more vocal about getting rid of Comey. It was Rod Rosenstein who put together that memo. And what the Democrats are doing is a total and complete overreach. It has to have a congressional purpose. You're not allowed to just go fish everywhere with 80 different people and hope that you find some fact that you can grab onto.
Well, and we had Congressman Adam Schiff, who heads up the House Intel Committee this weekend, saying this about something that may or may not be true.
We're also looking at persistent allegations that the Russians have been laundering money through the Trump organization. I don't know that that's true.
Brad, okay to throw that out there if you're the chair of the House Intel and you say, I'm going to throw this out there, but I don't know if it's true.
Well, look, he's not leaping to an immediate conclusion, which I think you would want to do. You don't want to immediately decide what is and is not true. But let's be real clear here, because Jason put this out there. These requests, the 81 different individuals, entities, corporations, whatever, are all people and entities that have already released documents, these very same documents, to federal investigators in the Southern District of New York, to state investigators in New York, and to the Mueller team. This is basically Congress, the House in particular, getting a duplicate copy of everything for their own report that would encompass all of these different investigations. And remember, under DOJ policy, the president can't be indicted. So no matter what these different teams find, all they could do is write an internal report at the end. That's why the House wants the documents as well.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned all these other entities that are already looking into all of these things. The New York Times, I think it was today, said basically what Democrats are doing is gathering all the same evidence. So if the Mueller report doesn't pan out, they can actually have the same evidence with a different standard of proof. It's not something that would maybe meet a criminal indictment, but they have other things they could do with it, possibly the I word, impeachment. I want to play something that Jerry Nadler said, congressman who heads up the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, where the impeachment would start. Here's what he said on ABC about laying the groundwork.
Before you impeach somebody, you have to persuade the American public that it ought to happen.
Put that together with his statement where he says, we've sent these document requests in order to begin building the public record. So, Kristen, is this all about getting to impeachment?
Yeah, it's very clear what's going on here. Now that very few people expect some big Russian collusion bombshell from Mueller, the Democrats are prepared to investigate Trump endlessly to find anything to remove him from office. Up until now, the Trump-Russia probe has pretty much existed behind the scenes. These new efforts will, of course, be a lot more public. It seems like there are very few limits as to who or what can actually be investigated. So this could potentially be damaging for Trump. But Shannon, I actually think this will be more politically damaging for the Democrats, because this just reeks of a political effort by the left to remove Trump from office as vengeance for him winning in 2016. These Democrats are obsessed with removing him from office. It's basically become the identity of their party. And I have to think at some point the constituents of these Democrats will demand something from them other than just resist Trump. It really doesn't seem like a great plan moving into 2020.
I mean, there's no doubt that the base on either side is going to be pretty entrenched, whether they're with President Trump, whether they're with the resist movement. So, Jason, what happens to the middle? Looking and watching and hearing these reports unfold over months and now years at a time, all the way up to the 2020 election, no doubt.
Well, look, I think they're going to be very dismayed at the Democrats who've been promising since day one. You listen to Adam Schiff, he said that there was actual evidence. There isn't. Not only no evidence, you don't have even a single witness. And for Adam Schiff to continue to throw out new allegations with no evidence, no witness, no smoking gun is the most irresponsible thing you can do when you're entrusted with that gavel there on the Intel Committee. He's a joke of a congressman. He is no way should be in that position. And I think the voters will ultimately take it out on the Democrats and take him out of power.
We'll see. This is what Sarah Sanders from the White House says tonight. Chairman Nadler and his fellow Democrats have embarked on a fishing expedition because they're terrified that their two-year false narrative of Russian collusion is crumbling. The Democrats are not after the truth. They're after the president. Bradley, do you think that the American public may view it that way?
I don't think quite yet. I think, look, the president's already an unindicted co-conspirator in the Southern District of New York, tied up in a criminal conspiracy that his former personal lawyer pled guilty to. Despite what Jason just said, there are already pieces of evidence out there about criminal coordination. You had Paul Manafort, the campaign chairman, giving 75 pages of polling data to who? The Russian intelligence guy, Konstantin Kilimnik. You had Roger Stone coordinating what he at least believed was information about WikiLeaks and giving it to the campaign. Is there going to be the smoking gun we remember from Watergate? I don't know. I'm not have that information any more than Jason does. But neither of us can conclude one way or the other where this will go.
All right. Well, we should know at some point when the special counsel wraps up. In the meantime, we'll have plenty to wade through with these Democrat investigations on the Hill. Thank you all. Power panel, great to have you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Shannon.
This is a Fox News alert breaking a short time ago. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that an attorney for Michael Cohen asked attorneys for President Trump about a possible pardon. The conversations allegedly happened back in April last year, weeks after the FBI raided Cohen's home and office. After the president's lawyers reportedly dismissed the idea, Cohen's lawyer left the impression that he might cooperate with the Southern District of New York's probe. And this Fox News alert, dozens of people are still missing in Alabama tonight after a tornado ripped through a rural community on Sunday, leaving more than 20 people dead. Authorities shedding new light tonight on the massive twister and just how fast it was traveling. Correspondent Jonathan Sari is there. He's got the latest.
Good evening, Shannon. As we go into the night, you can still hear the sound of hammers and occasional saws as work crews are rebuilding and also trying to get into neighborhoods temporarily isolated from the outside world in the wake of this powerful storm. The day after the storm, search teams combed through the worst-hit communities that were either too dangerous or impossible to reach overnight.
We are here today to stand with you today, tomorrow, and the days and weeks ahead.
Oh, my God. The National Weather Service now believes the twister that came through here yesterday was a powerful EF4, packing winds of 170 miles per hour.
This was the deadliest tornado in the United States since the Moore, Oklahoma tornado in 2013.
It's okay, hey, baby.
A young girl embraces her grandmother who survived the storm by taking cover in an interior closet. Other survivors share similar stories.
I was in my room, and I tried to go up the hall. The whole top just started peeling off the house. So I just started praying, but God, he delivered her.
Intense winds toppled a cell tower, blocking portions of a highway near Smith Station, Alabama. The storm system knocked out power to more than 40,000 homes and businesses across Alabama and Georgia, and it caused damage in South Carolina and the Florida Panhandle, toppling trees and utility poles. But by far the worst damage was in eastern Alabama.
We pledge our unwavering support to help you rebuild from the very depths of this horrible tragedy.
Today, both the White House and Congress offered their condolences and assistance. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Congress will stand by the families reeling from this tragedy and will fight to help this community recover and rebuild. And while the property damage is extensive, the human toll has been downright devastating. Among the confirmed fatalities, authorities say there were at least 3 children who lost their lives, ages 6, 9, and 10. Shannon?
Jonathan Sari on the ground there in Alabama. Thank you. Could the president's own party be the one to block his national emergency declaration regarding the border? Well, a growing number of Republicans say they support the president, but not this move to funnel more funding to a wall along the southern border.
I do believe that there is at least 10 Republican no votes. We'll see, possibly more.
Former Border Patrol Chief Mark Morgan and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Southern border. The Washington Post detailing a recent surge of Central American migrant families crossing into the U.S. illegally in El Paso, saying U.S. Border Patrol agents have detained more than 70,000 migrants just last month. Tonight, the debate over the president's border wall and his emergency declaration is testing party loyalty. Correspondent Leland Vittert is here with the latest. Hey, Leland.
Well, evening, Shannon. The showdown is upon us, setting up the first veto by President Trump. And perhaps most stunning is that he has a Republican to thank for it. Even more noteworthy, a Republican he plays golf with, Senator Rand Paul, who says the president's emergency declaration on the southern border is a bridge too far.
Most of us think it would be emergency if, there's a television show where the State of the Union, everything blows up and everybody dies. That would be an emergency. People incapacitated by anthrax, that's an emergency. But wanting to fund something that Congress wouldn't give you the money for, I think really doesn't.
The junior senator from Kentucky joined Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Tom Tillis of North Carolina in opposing the president. Add them to the 47 senators who caucus with the Democrats against the national emergency, and it passes the Senate.
I think what is clear in the Senate is there will be enough votes to pass the resolution of disapproval, which will then be vetoed by the president.
This is the math that Mitch McConnell is counting on. Even with the 4 Republican senators seen as possible additional defectors, it's nowhere near close enough to the 67 votes in the Senate needed to override a veto. And the original resolution in the House passed with 245 votes, well short of the 285 needed to override the promised veto.
America's southern border must be urgently and very strongly secured. We fight wars 6,000 miles away. We spend billions and billions of dollars, but we don't control our own border.
President Trump didn't call his golfing partner out by name today, and Paul seemed to be looking forward to his 4th presidential outing.
Yeah, I spoke to the president last night, and we had a good discussion. He says he understands where I'm coming from, and he didn't tell me we would never play golf again. So I don't know. I think we're okay.
Well, noteworthy, after one of their previous rounds, Rand Paul told reporters, "Didn't you know President Trump never loses?" As the mass stands tonight, that will hold true on the national emergency declaration as well. Shannon?
All right, Leland Bitter, thank you very much. Okay, so as Leland said, looks like we're about to see President Trump's first veto. So let's turn to the former Border Patrol chief under President Obama, Mark Morgan, and the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, to talk about what we're dealing with here. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Okay, so you saw Rand Paul there, Senator Paul. He wrote an op-ed for us saying, every single Republican I know decried President Obama's use of executive power to legislate. We were right then, but the only way to be an honest office holder is to stand up for the same principles no matter who is in power. General, I know that you all launched a number of lawsuits, Texas did, against the Obama administration, so and about some of these executive power issues. Why is it different? Or do you think it is this time?
No, so the president is given this authority through a statute, and the definition of national emergency is never defined in that statute. It's totally up to the president to make that decision. And so in this case, you know, Congress hasn't come in and said, here's what the definition is, and so they've always left it up to every president to decide what a national emergency is. It's no different here.
Okay, so Mark, Senator Tom Tillis, also one of those who's going to vote against the president on this, says that Republicans should be thinking about this. He says, imagine a President Bernie Sanders declaring a national emergency to implement parts of the radical Green New Deal, a President Elizabeth Warren declaring a national emergency to shut down banks and take over the nation's financial institutions, or President Cory Booker declaring a national emergency to restrict Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, so Shannon, I'm not worried about that, because what I'm worried about right now, as well as the expert, is what's going on today at the southwest border, and that's what this national emergency is about. They can deal with that when that comes. But anybody, to include Rand Paul, he's got the issue shaped wrong. This is not about the president abusing of his authority to circumvent the Congressional Appropriations Authority. This is about, if he votes no against this, he is saying that he does not, once again, believe the experts on the ground that are saying this is a crisis. He's not believing the numbers. You just had in your open 70,000 in 1 month. Just do the math real quick. If that continues the rest of this year, we're looking at 800,000 illegal aliens coming into the country, and that's just the ones we catch. How is that not a crisis?
NBC News, Wall Street Journal poll on this. The American public aren't convinced either, because 39% of them approve of the president doing this national emergency to build the wall. 60% disapprove.
If they were on the border, I think they might have a different opinion. People need to just come and see what's going on at the border. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of crimes being committed. We've got human trafficking. We've got drugs coming across the border. Talking to some of the families I've talked to about who have lost loved ones, I mean, for us, it's a crisis because we're a border state. So, you know, you have a different perspective when you're a border state than maybe when you're not.
I thought it was interesting. The New York Times did a piece about what's happening at the border, and to their, descriptive sentencing on this. This is what they say. Undocumented women making their way into American border towns have been beaten for disobeying smugglers, impregnated by strangers, coerced into prostitution, shackled to beds and trees, in at least a handful of cases bound with duct tape, rope, or handcuffs. I mean, when you think about it in those terms, nobody wants any woman, any child, any man to go through that kind of treatment. And they're saying this is what's happening.
But Jan, you're just making it up, right? It's a manufactured crisis.
Well, the New York Times is making it up then.
Right, that's what I mean. I mean, the facts, that's what's incredulous. Again, fact after fact after fact. You know, the current chief of Border Patrol, Carla Provost, she just got out and provided congressional testimony where she talked about last year, Border Patrol conducted 4,300 rescues of people trying to illegal the country. This year so far, the Border Patrol have risked their lives to conduct 1,000 rescues. This is not compassionate. To not secure our borders is not compassionate. They're allowing women and children to be abused, just like you said. That's not manufactured, that's fact. People are dying every day because we have incentives and we're not securing the border. Those are facts. It's not compassionate. This is the wrong thing not to secure our borders.
Well, we'll see. If the president vetoes this and it winds up at the Supreme Court, they'll make the decision. Meantime, Attorney General, Mark, great to have you both.
Hey, thank you.
All right, another Democrat enters the crowded 2020 presidential field. Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper joins 13 others who've already made it official. But does a moderate governor have a chance of beating the Democratic Socialists to secure the nomination? Plus, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff facing serious charges tonight. We're going to tell you about the stunning allegations just filed with the Federal Election Commission. Breaking tonight, Fox News has obtained a draft of the House anti-Semitism resolution. Democrats are planning to introduce in the wake of yet more controversial statements by freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Correspondent Garrett Tenney is here to tell us what's in it. Good evening, Garrett.
Shannon, good evening to you. Well, this resolution does not mention Congressman Ilhan Omar by name, but it does clearly rebuke the very kind of language that she's in hot water for using. According to a draft of the resolution, its purpose is to reject anti-Semitism as hateful expressions of intolerance that are contradictory to the values that define the people of the United States. It goes on to list examples of what constitutes anti-Semitism and includes multiple references to accusations of dual loyalty, which suggests that Jewish Americans are more loyal to Israel than to the U.S. That is the very thing Omar is being criticized for after suggesting last week that American supporters of Israel are pushing people to have allegiance to another country.
I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country. I want to ask, why is it okay for me to talk about the influence of the NRA, of fossil fuel industries, or Big Pharma, and not talk about a powerful lobbying group that is influencing policy?
Those comments have been met with widespread condemnation from her fellow Democrats, including Jewish Congressman Eliot Engel, who said her remarks were outrageous and a vile anti-Semitic slur. Now, Congresswoman Nita Lowey urged Omar to retract the statement, tweeting, "Lawmakers must be able to debate without prejudice or bigotry. I am saddened that Representative Omar continues to mischaracterize support for Israel." Despite that backlash, the freshman lawmaker is doubling down, tweeting, "I have not mischaracterized our relationship with Israel. I have questioned it, and that has been clear from my end. I am told every day that I am anti-American if I am not pro-Israel. I find that to be problematic, and I am not alone. I just happen to be willing to speak up on it and open myself to attacks." Omar has been in Congress for less than 3 months, but this is at least the third time she's been accused of making anti-Semitic remarks. With her latest comments, nearly a dozen pro-Israel groups are now reportedly urging House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to remove Omar from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Shannon?
It is an important committee assignment.
Yes, very big.
All right, Garrett, thank you. All right, the already crowded Democratic presidential primary just got bigger. A former governor and big city mayor is in, while the frontrunner among declared candidates is breaking away from some other progressive candidates. Senator Bernie Sanders says he does not support slavery reparations. That was on the Breakfast Club radio show today.
You mean just a check to every African American? Yes. Well, then there's a check to every Native American who were nearly wiped out when the settlers first came here. I think the way we go forward is to build America together.
Correspondent Peter Ducey has more on the 2020 countdown tonight.
The first wave of 2020 candidates came from Congress. The next wave is coming from state houses.
I'm John Hickenlooper. I'm running for president because we're facing a crisis that threatens everything we stand for.
The former Colorado governor joins a field where many of the most excited primary voters have made up their minds, because this weekend, 12,500 screaming fans turned out in Chicago, not to cheer for the Bulls or the Bears or the Blackhawks, but for Bernie.
3 years ago, they thought we were kind of crazy and extreme. Not the case anymore.
Senator Sanders took his Democratic Socialist pitch to the radio this morning, where he pledged to legalize pot.
Have you ever smoked? A few times. Okay. Didn't do a whole lot for me. My recollection is I nearly coughed my brains out.
In Selma, 2020 candidate and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker was seen hugging the 2016 nominee Hillary Clinton, whose family brand is apparently fading. The AP reports her husband, Bill, once a top surrogate, likely won't be next year because, quote, so far, none of the party's early frontrunners has had a formal meeting with Clinton, nor have the women who are running in the historically diverse primary field. Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says he's 2 or 3 weeks away from a decision on a campaign and had a chance to check in with Hillary in Selma, but passed.
Did Senator Clinton just give you any advice or anything today?
No.
Nothing. Thank you guys. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Safe trip home.
A Wall Street Journal NBC News poll finds that President Trump begins his re-election effort with 4 out of 10 voters saying they'll definitely or probably vote for him. And the president has 16 months to try to improve that number before Democrats even nominate his challenger. Shannon?
Peter Ducey, thank you. Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez under fire tonight. That story leads tonight's Real News Roundup. Ocasio-Cortez and her chief of staff facing a complaint filed with the Federal Election Commission. The complaint says that the New York Democrats may have violated campaign finance laws by working to funnel nearly $1 million in contributions from political action committees to 2 private companies owned by her chief of staff. Although such transfers would not necessarily be improper, the complaint drafted by the conservative National Legal and Policy Center argues that the goal was seemingly to illegally dodge detailed legal reporting requirements designed to track campaign expenditures. Hillary Clinton telling News 12 Westchester tonight she is not running in 2020. She also says she's not considering office in New York. That includes mayor or governor. And Philadelphia becoming the first city in the nation to ban so-called cashless stores. You can't pay there with cash. Now, supporters say it protects low-income residents from discrimination, but Amazon says it could discourage them from opening a line of stores in the city of brotherly love. Amazon's legal team says it's currently exploring its options. Well, in his fiery speech from CPAC, President Trump slams the left and praises his own accomplishments. Some believe the 2-plus-hour speech rallied his base and was enough to secure his re-election.
We're in the swamp of Washington, D.C. But you know what? We're winning, and they're not.
Others hated this speech, so our power panel is here on deck to add perspective. Josh.
Democrat lawmakers have totally abandoned the American mainstream. They're embracing open borders, socialism, and extreme late-term abortion. But perhaps nothing is more extreme than the Democrats' plan to completely take over American energy. When the wind stops blowing, that's the end of your electric. Darling? Darling, is the wind blowing today? I'd like to watch television, darling.
More than 2 hours of that this weekend at CPAC. Many conservatives say it was the president's best speech yet, but liberals are calling it completely unhinged. Was it a glimpse into his 2020 re-election strategy? Time now for tonight's Power Panel. Former national spokesperson for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, Josh Schwerin. And back for round 2, Kristen Tate and Jason Chaffetz. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to play something from a national security analyst on CNN who was not a fan of the speech. Here's what he said about it.
Well, his statement makes me sick. On a personal level, preserving our heritage, reclaiming our heritage, that sounds a lot like a certain leader that killed members of my family and about 6 million other Jews in the 1940s.
Sam is a her. Okay, let's start there, Kristen. She said when you invoke Hitler, you know, that's serious business, but that's her take on the speech.
Well, yeah, I mean, the left and a lot of people in the media hated this speech, but this was not a speech for them, nor was it even really a speech for the American public as a whole. This was a speech kind of packaged and delivered for Trump's base, and they loved it. I mean, Trump was funny, he was bold, he was combative, and at times, I think he did a pretty good job of laying out a positive future for the country. But what really struck me, Shannon, is that this speech was really evidence that Trump has really transformed the Republican Party. Today, the Republican Party is the Trump Party. He kept people entertained for 2 hours. The man has a lot of energy, and right now, I don't know if any of the Democrats who are declared for 2020 can keep up with him.
And he hugged the flag. You saw him hugging the flag, too. Another big moment there.
That was a great moment.
Nick Gillespie in Reason says this. Trump just might have won the 2020 election today. Referring to the speech, he says, there's simply no potential candidate in the Democratic Party who wouldn't be absolutely blown off the stage by him. I say this as someone who is neither a Trump fanboy nor a never Trumper, but he was not simply good. He was Prince at the Super Bowl great. Josh, I liked that Prince performance. I'm not going to lie.
I don't quite agree with that. My problem with his speech was actually exactly what Kristen just said. He wasn't speaking to all of America. He was only speaking to the diehard fans in the room. And when Trump ran, he talked about the forgotten men and women of America, and now he's forgotten them. So he talks about how the economy is the best it's ever been. Meanwhile, Midwest farmers are going bankrupt at higher rates than they did during the recession. 7 million Americans are 3 months behind on their car loans. Those are giant red flags to the economy. And Donald Trump is sitting here saying everything is great, while healthcare costs are going up, wages can't keep up with the cost of education, or just living your life. And Trump has forgotten what he talked about in 2016 that did help him get here, and this is a huge opportunity for Democrats, and I think it's going to be a big problem for him as he runs for re-election.
Okay, I want to make sure that we get to our second topic here, because this is a new filing, a complaint filed with the Federal Election Commission against Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and her chief of staff, making allegations about them funneling money to two of his private companies. The chief of staff, Tom Anderson, who is the head of this group, a conservative group, he says this about their filing. He says, "I've never seen a more ambitious operation to circumvent reporting requirements. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has been quite vocal in condemning so-called dark money, but her own campaign went to great lengths to avoid the sunlight of disclosure." Jason, it's an allegation for now, but that's what it is.
It's a very serious allegation. It involves nearly $1 million. You know, there are campaign limits in what you give to a campaign, what you can give to a PAC, how the PAC discloses that, and how they disperse this money. But it appears, at least based on the allegation, that these PACs were created and then these LLCs, these companies were formed in an elaborate scheme to funnel some money, nearly $1 million. That's the allegation. And for, you know, AOC, who's tried to champion openness, transparency, and accountability, this is about as serious of an allegation as it gets. It includes fines and going to jail if it was all true and found guilty.
Well, there's much more and a lengthy investigation ahead, but those are the allegations tonight, and we await a response from the Congresswoman's office as well. We got to leave it there. Power panel, thank you for being with us tonight. Great to see you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, coming up, the Trump administration diverts millions of dollars away from clinics performing abortions, like Planned Parenthood, as expected. Lawsuits have been filed, and guess where? Ethan Behrman and Lila Rose are suing or planning to sue the Trump administration over new policy that could cut millions of dollars in federal funding from Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers. California's Democratic Attorney General is leading the charge, filing a separate lawsuit today. Joining me now, the host of Left Coast News, Ethan Behrman, and the founder and president of Live Action, Lila Rose. Great to see both of you tonight.
Good to see you, Shannon.
All right, I'm going to play a little bit of what the California Attorney General, Javier Becerra, had to say about why he filed.
Today's March 4th, 2019. The operative words there are 2019. This is not 1920. Yet, here we are, still fighting the same old battles for women's rights. Make no mistake, this is a systematic effort by this administration to end access to birth control and safe, legal abortion.
Lila, the Democrats say millions of women will lose access to not only birth control, but health care as well.
This is one of the biggest scams in American politics today, Shannon, that Planned Parenthood, the biggest abortion chain. Their abortion numbers have gone up over the last 10 years. Their so-called health care services, like cancer screenings, have gone down. They've done more and more abortions. They commit 900 abortions a day. And people like Attorney General Becerra, his campaign was funded by Planned Parenthood. So, of course, he's going to try to block the federal government from stopping poor taxpayers like you and I from having to fund this abortion giant that's committing these atrocities and lying to women in the process.
And so people know what we're talking about is there's money that goes out through Title X to various health clinics and family planning clinics all over the country. So the money would go to other health clinics that don't perform abortions or refer people for abortions. Ethan, the House Minority Whip, Steve Scalise, says this: the Title X program was never intended to subsidize abortion providers. During the Clinton administration, this program was distorted, and Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers started receiving millions of taxpayer dollars. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting. Title X also requires a segregation of funds in separate accounts to be used, and therefore the Title X funds can't be used for abortion providing. It's important to note that only 3% of Planned Parenthood's expenses are related to abortion. I personally know, and I've gone with one of my sisters way back when, absolutely, in college, when she was in college and poor, and she needed to have some women's health services performed. I took her through the protesters, walked with her through the protesters at Planned Parenthood. It wasn't for an abortion, it was for women's health services. That is not unique, and in places like rural Texas, Planned Parenthood is the only provider for 200 miles around. So you're actually having a real impact for lower income women's access to health care.
Let me bring Lila in here, because that's obviously one of the big arguments, is that there won't be health care options. There are federal health clinics out there that don't perform abortions, but they aren't everywhere.
So there are thousands of federally qualified health centers that provide more comprehensive services than Planned Parenthood. And Ethan, I think you're referring to an area where Planned Parenthood is the only game in town for abortion. And the reality is that's their focus, abortion. This 3% number that you mentioned is inaccurate. Planned Parenthood claims only 3% of what we do is abortion. That's a lie. Even the Washington Post has given that 3 Pinocchios. Slate has called it very misleading. Their cash cow, 40% of their clinic income is from abortion. Their numbers of abortions have gone up while their other health services have gone down. If they really cared so much about other health services, why don't they stop doing abortions? Why don't they give up the killing of the children in their facilities, the 900 children every day whose lives are ended? Why don't they actually provide holistic health care for women? That's not what they're doing.
Ethan, can they separate off and say, okay, we won't do abortions if we're really about making sure that women do have health care and other screenings, we'll, give that part up?
I mean, I can't speak to what they're doing organizationally, but God forbid you ever have a miscarriage and need a DNC, because that is an almost identical procedure to an abortion.
They don't serve women with miscarriages.
Women have problems getting access to getting their DNCs in a timely fashion after having a miscarriage. I personally know women who have run into that specific problem.
You don't go to Planned Parenthood for that, Ethan. You go to a hospital. You go to your primary care physician.
No, absolutely. Planned Parenthood does those as well. And this is access to health care, and the separation of funds is required by law already.
All right, you guys have given us some stuff that we'll actually fact check, and we will put out the information on that because we won't settle this debate tonight. But Ethan and Lila, we thank you both for being here. Talk about it.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Ethan.
All right, when we return, our Midnight Hero on a mission to support our fallen heroes. Plus, concerns by some on the right about the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Conservatives are worried he may be drifting permanently to the left.